Imagine having the weight of an entire city on your shoulders before you even finish high school. Stephon Marbury was not just another kid playing on the asphalt of New York, he was the chosen one. His 3 older brothers had all chased the professional basketball dream, and all 3 had fallen short. The pressure crushing down on Stephon was immense, a heavy family burden demanding that he succeed where his bloodline had failed. He was the prodigious talent of Lincoln High School, dazzling crowds with a streetball flair that seemed almost supernatural. But how much of that early glory was genuine, and how much was a carefully constructed myth? According to the archives of the high school athletic associations, Stephon Marbury was officially crowned New York State Mr. Basketball in 1995. This title was essentially a royal decree in the 5 boroughs. Yet, earning that crown brought a dangerous level of adulation. Local sports press reports from the 90s noted that he averaged 27.4 points per game during his senior year. These figures stand as a testament to his sheer dominance, but they also raise a critical question. When a teenager is handed the keys to the city and told he is unstoppable based on those 27.4 points, does it build character, or does it plant the seeds of an uncontrollable ego? Stephon Marbury was treated like royalty, shielded from criticism, and surrounded by enablers who whispered promises of endless wealth and fame. The neighborhood saw him as a ticket out of poverty, a human lottery ticket waiting to be cashed. The expectations were intoxicating, blinding everyone to the immense psychological toll it was taking on a young man who was barely of age. But the status of a street legend meant very little to the ruthless executives of the professional league, and the illusion of control would shatter quickly. The reality check was already in motion, and on June 26, 1996, a single sealed envelope featuring his name became the centerpiece of the first major behind-the-scenes manipulation of his life. The bright lights of the professional draft are supposed to represent the culmination of a lifelong dream. But for Stephon Marbury, it was the moment the harsh, cold business of sports revealed its true face. Official league draft logs show that on June 26, 1996, Stephon was selected 4th overall by the Milwaukee Bucks. He put on their green hat, smiled for the flashing cameras, and shook the commissioner's hand. However, behind the curtain, a cynical and calculated deal had already been struck without his knowledge. Before the sweat could even dry on his brow, he was abruptly traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves in exchange for Ray Allen. Why did this sudden betrayal happen so publicly? Financial summaries of the league from that era reveal a significant salary difference between the 4th and 5th draft picks, indicating that agents and front office executives were spinning webs of intrigue purely to manipulate rookie wage scales. This financial maneuver turned a proud young athlete into a mere bargaining chip. Stephon Marbury felt the sting of rejection instantly. He realized that to the billionaires running the league, he was not a prodigy. He was just an asset to be flipped for a better margin. The manipulation left a deep psychological scar. He was being shipped off to a frozen northern city, far from the bright lights and media adoration of his hometown. This immediate sense of betrayal planted a deep-seated distrust of authority figures and management that would haunt him for over a decade. He was treated as merchandise right out of the gate, and that transaction forged a cynical armor around his ego. It seemed like the move to the bitter cold of Minnesota was an unfair exile, a punishment for corporate greed. Yet, against all odds, that freezing isolation during the 1996 to 1997 season forged a dynamic pairing that would soon make the entire basketball world tremble. Arriving in the icy climate of Minnesota, Stephon Marbury found an unexpected brother in arms. He teamed up with a young, fiercely passionate Kevin Garnett, and together they electrified a franchise that had been trapped in chronic mediocrity. They were young, fearless, and played with a spectacular rhythm that captivated television audiences across the nation. Official association statistics confirm that this explosive pairing dragged the Timberwolves into the postseason playoffs in both 1997 and 1998, breaking a humiliating multi-year drought for the organization. They were heralded as the future of the league, the unstoppable tandem that would dominate for a decade. But beneath the highlight reels, a toxic rivalry was quietly brewing. Sports registries documented that Stephon averaged 15.8 points and 7.8 assists per game during his debut campaign. These were phenomenal, undeniable numbers. But look closer at those digits, and a darker narrative emerges. Were these the statistics of a team player or a man desperately trying to outshine his partner? Stephon Marbury possessed a monumental ego, and he fundamentally believed he was the primary star of the team, the true architect of their success. He demanded the spotlight, bristling whenever the media showered praise on Garnett instead of him. The locker room gradually transformed into a quiet battleground of competing egos, with teammates forced to navigate the silent tension between their two leaders. The beautiful chemistry on the court was merely a facade, hiding a cold war of ambitions. The foundation of their friendship was cracking under the weight of jealousy and pride. The fragile illusion of teamwork completely shattered in October 1997, when an official document bearing a truly astronomical sum was placed on the table, permanently destroying their bond and tearing the franchise apart. The locker room was no longer a sanctuary. It was a ticking time bomb of jealousy. In the cutthroat world of professional sports, loyalty often has a massive price tag, and Stephon Marbury was about to find out exactly what his teammate was worth to the franchise. According to public financial reports from the organization, in October 1997, Kevin Garnett signed an unprecedented contract extension worth exactly $126 million. The ink was barely dry on that document, but the shockwaves were felt instantly across the entire league. How could a management team hand over the keys to the kingdom to a forward, while their brilliant point guard, the true engine of the offense, was left waiting in the wings with empty hands? In the reports of major sports media, it was widely noted that Stephon felt profoundly disrespected by the front office. The money was not just a salary, it was a glaring symbol of who the team truly valued as their cornerstone. The brewing resentment finally exploded during the bitter labor dispute that halted the sport. In interviews given by sports agents to leading media outlets during the lockout of 1999, it was revealed that Stephon Marbury was vehemently demanding a maximum-level contract of his own, absolutely refusing to accept a secondary financial role. But why did this specific demand surface exactly when the league was completely paralyzed? Was it a calculated power play, or the desperate cry of a star who felt his spotlight was being stolen by his best friend? He made his ultimatum crystal clear: pay the king his ransom, or trade him at any cost. The front office was completely furious with his brazen demands and refusal to compromise. The bridge was entirely burned, and on March 11, 1999, Stephon was forcefully shown the exit, sent packing to a franchise widely considered a graveyard for elite talent. Stephon Marbury traded the frozen northern tundra for the polluted industrial skyline of the East Coast, but a change of scenery could not fix a fundamentally broken situation. Official league transaction documents confirm that the monumental trade to the New Jersey Nets was finalized on March 11, 1999. He was finally the undisputed alpha dog of his own squad, the sole marquee attraction for the desperate local fans. He put up spectacular individual numbers, crossing up defenders and scoring at will, looking every bit the superstar he claimed to be. In the official press releases issued by the league office, Stephon Marbury was proudly named to the All-NBA third team in the year 2000. But here is where the main question arises. Why did these dazzling personal accolades coincide with utterly dismal team records? In the reports of sports journalists covering the team on a daily basis, it was frequently noted that the locker room culture was exceptionally toxic, plagued by a severe lack of trust and constant bickering. The New Jersey Nets were losing constantly, and the whispers in the stadium corridors grew noticeably louder. Critics argued he was a selfish stat padder, a spectacular individual talent who fundamentally did not know how to lead a group of men to victory. He was eagerly collecting awards while his franchise was sinking to the absolute bottom of the professional standings. Was he truly a misunderstood genius carrying a terrible roster, or was he the very poison crippling the team's internal chemistry? He reveled in his individual glory, turning a blind eye to the mounting losses and the frustrated groans of the home crowd. While he was soaking up the adulation of being selected for the All-Star exhibition game in February 2001, the franchise managers were already meeting in secret, quietly negotiating a deal to eliminate him from their roster entirely. The ultimate insult to a proud athlete is not just being traded away against your will, but watching your immediate replacement achieve the massive success you never could. Transaction logs from the league office show that on July 18, 2001, Stephon Marbury was shipped off to the Phoenix Suns in a blockbuster swap for Jason Kidd. Almost overnight, Kidd miraculously transformed the struggling New Jersey franchise, dragging them all the way to the championship finals. For Stephon, it was a humiliating public indictment that the problem all along had been him. Out in the blistering heat of Arizona, he desperately tried to reinvent his public image, but the desert sun only illuminated his deepest personal flaws. Away from the court, his life was rapidly spiraling out of his control. According to police reports and local court materials from 2002, Stephon Marbury was involved in a highly publicized incident involving driving under the influence in the affluent suburb of Scottsdale. In the legal case files, it was specifically noted that his behavior during the late-night traffic stop was erratic, leading to serious legal consequences and public embarrassment. But why did this dangerous behavior manifest so far from his hometown? Was the immense pressure of constant professional failure finally breaking his spirit? Or was he simply succumbing to the dark side of immense wealth and zero accountability? He was heavily fined, and the legal troubles were quietly smoothed over by high-priced attorneys. But the permanent damage to his reputation was severe. The whispers about his character were no longer just about basketball. They were about his fundamental reliability as a human being. The fines and court dates were swept under the rug, but in January 2004, a sudden phone call from his native New York would promise him a fateful contract that would ultimately shatter his psychological well-being. The prodigal son was finally coming home, but the homecoming parade was built on a foundation of sand. The entire city of New York had been holding its breath, desperately praying that the kid from Coney Island would resurrect their beloved struggling franchise. According to the news archives from that winter, the monumental trade bringing Stephon Marbury to the New York Knicks became official on January 5, 2004. The hometown hero was expected to be the ultimate savior, the missing puzzle piece that would restore glory to the Mecca of basketball. But here is where the main question arises. Was he truly brought in to win championships, or was he merely a desperate marketing ploy by a panicked front office? In the salary ledgers of the Players Association, it was clearly documented that his massive contract escalated to pay him over $19 million a year. This astronomical sum immediately placed an unimaginable weight on his shoulders. He was no longer just a talented point guard. He was the most expensive investment in the entire arena. In the reports of local journalists, it was frequently noted that the pressure inside the legendary building was suffocating, turning every missed shot into a massive public referendum on his worth. Instead of a triumphant return, his homecoming quickly morphed into a gilded cage. He was drowning under the massive expectations of millions of rabid fans, expected to deliver miracles on a nightly basis with a fundamentally flawed roster. The savior of New York was beginning to lose his grip on the situation, and the tension was about to reach a boiling point. The immense pressure was slowly tearing the team apart from the inside, and already by the 2005 to 2006 season, a massive conflict erupted in the locker room that the press would infamously dub the War of the Egos. When a franchise is crumbling, management usually turns to a proven authoritarian to clean up the mess. That is exactly what happened when the organization made a massive move to bring in a legendary, albeit incredibly strict, leader. Official club statements reveal that Larry Brown was appointed as the head coach during the summer of 2005, promising to instill discipline and absolute accountability. However, putting a rigidly demanding coach in the same room as Stephon Marbury was akin to throwing a lit match into a powder keg. Their relationship was completely doomed from the very first practice. How could an old-school disciplinarian ever coexist with a superstar who genuinely believed he was the ultimate authority on the court? According to the regular season statistical records, that campaign became an absolute nightmare, resulting in a historically atrocious 23 wins and 59 losses. This disastrous record stands as a glaring piece of evidence. In the reports of sports journalists covering the Daily Beat, it was explicitly noted that the locker room had become highly toxic, with Stephon allegedly leading a silent mutiny against the coaching staff. He was publicly clashing with the head coach, openly questioning his tactics during press conferences, and noticeably stalling the offense during crucial moments of games. Was he deliberately sabotaging the team to prove a point? Or was he genuinely incapable of adapting to a system that did not revolve entirely around his ego? The local newspapers were filled with daily drama, painting a picture of a broken superstar completely alienated from his peers. The tension was unbearable, costing the franchise millions in lost revenue and shattered credibility. Larry Brown was eventually dismissed and received a giant financial settlement, but the man who replaced him would soon drag Stephon into a massive federal court battle. The arrival of a new, highly charismatic executive was supposed to calm the turbulent waters, but instead, it unleashed a storm of controversy that permanently stained the organization's legacy. Isaiah Thomas took the reins, and the franchise quickly descended from a sporting disappointment into a full-blown corporate scandal. Stephon Marbury found himself trapped not just in a losing system, but in a highly publicized legal nightmare. Transcripts from the Manhattan Federal Court show that during the summer of 2007, Stephon was forced to give sworn testimony in a massive civil lawsuit regarding serious allegations of inappropriate conduct within the front office. The spotlight shifted entirely from his jump shot to his character and his behavior behind closed doors. But why was the star point guard suddenly the focal point of a lawsuit aimed at the upper management? In the materials of the civil case, it was noted that his off-court interactions made him a star witness in a trial that exposed the darkest corners of the franchise's corporate culture. The judgments from the civil proceedings revealed a devastating financial blow. The jury awarded a staggering $11.6 million in damages to the former female executive. This enormous figure was not just a financial penalty, it was a loud public condemnation of the toxic environment Stephon was deeply a part of. The courtroom drama utterly destroyed whatever remained of his heroic public image. Fans who once wore his jersey with immense pride now viewed him with deep suspicion and disgust. He walked out of that courthouse as an absolute outcast to the elite circles of the league, his reputation completely in tatters. Yet, precisely while his public standing was completely collapsing, he launched a unique business project whose initial sales figures absolutely shocked the giant corporate shoe monopolies. While the corporate sports world was openly laughing at his locker room disasters, Stephon Marbury was quietly building an underground empire aimed right at the throat of the giant athletic shoe monopolies. According to the financial reports and promotional catalogs from the year 2006, the retail price for his signature sneaker, the Starbury 1, was set at exactly $14.98. But why was an elite, highly paid athlete practically giving away his own signature merchandise when his famous peers were charging hundreds of dollars for theirs? In the business profiles published during that era, it was frequently noted that Stephon harbored a deep desire to create genuinely affordable footwear for the underprivileged kids growing up in the very same rough city neighborhoods he had barely survived. This was a direct, unapologetic attack on the establishment, a Robin Hood maneuver in a professional league entirely built on extreme corporate greed. The industry giants scoffed at the cheap price tag, confidently assuming the brand would be a massive, embarrassing failure. However, corporate sales records from the retail chain Stephen Barry's revealed a staggering volume of over 3 million pairs sold within the very first year of production. 3 million pairs. How could a man so widely despised by the sports media simultaneously command such incredible, unwavering loyalty from working-class families across the nation? In the investigative features covering this sudden retail phenomenon, it was highlighted that the elite executives were genuinely terrified of this grassroots anti-corporate movement. Yet, trying to manage a rapidly expanding, controversial retail business while simultaneously dealing with the horrific stress of a collapsing athletic career was actively tearing his mind apart. The daily pressure was completely unsustainable. His primary business partners would eventually file for bankruptcy, but the true, soul-crushing blow that would completely derail his reality in December 2007 had absolutely nothing to do with a financial crisis. The dazzling, hypnotic lights of the world's most famous arena can often blind the cheering audience to the very real, human tragedies unfolding right in front of them. The lowest point in the turbulent life of Stephon Marbury was not a missed shot or a harsh newspaper headline, but an agonizing family crisis that played out entirely during a live television broadcast. According to the archives of the New York City Press, on the evening of December 2, 2007, a horrific medical event occurred right in the spectator stands. His father, Don Marbury, suddenly collapsed while watching his beloved son play, his heart ultimately failing him right in the middle of the noisy stadium. But the most profoundly disturbing part of this tragic evening was not the sudden medical emergency itself, but the dark, heavy cloud of suspicion that immediately enveloped the franchise's wealthy management. How is it fundamentally possible that a star player's father is rushed to the emergency room, yet the player himself is left entirely in the dark, happily playing a game until the final buzzer sounds? In the published transcripts of the post-game press conference, head coach Isiah Thomas made highly controversial, contradictory statements regarding exactly when the club staff actually became aware of the unfolding disaster. These very statements immediately ignited a massive firestorm of public accusations. Conflicting stories and bitter rumors still surround that fateful night to this day. The player's grieving family was reportedly convinced the executives purposely withheld the critical information just to keep Stephon focused on winning a completely meaningless regular season game. In the reports of major sports outlets, the narrative portrayed a brutally callous front office treating their highest-paid employee like a disposable, emotionless gladiator. Did the managers genuinely try to protect him from the shock? Or did they coldly prioritize a basketball score over a son's fundamental right to say a final goodbye? The sheer agony of that profound personal loss completely shattered whatever fragile trust remained between the athlete and the massive organization. The grief fundamentally broke his spirit, and by the following season, a brand new coaching staff would enact a highly unprecedented financial decision. They were willing to pay him millions of dollars just to ensure he never set foot inside their arena ever again. When a new regime takes absolute power over a failing organization, their very first order of business is usually to eliminate the lingering, expensive ghosts of the past. The highly publicized arrival of a new, celebrated head coach was supposed to signal a glorious fresh start for the suffering franchise, but for Stephon Marbury, it marked the beginning of an incredibly humiliating, highly public exile. The organization brought in Mike D'Antoni in the summer of 2008 to implement a fast-paced, joyful style of play. Yet the most famous face of the entire team was completely, ruthlessly erased from the picture. Official club press releases from November 2008 confirmed a truly shocking reality. Stephon was formally and legally banished from all team activities. He was physically completely healthy. He was sitting on a massive, guaranteed contract, yet he was explicitly ordered by his bosses to stay home. Why would a massive corporation choose to pay a perfectly healthy man roughly $20 million a year to simply sit on his couch and watch his own teammates on television? In the grievance documents filed with the Players' Union, a highly contentious financial fine of nearly $400,000 was officially registered, punishing Stephon for allegedly refusing a direct order to enter a game as a substitute. This staggering financial penalty essentially formalized the open, bitter warfare between the isolated player and the billionaire management. In the public statements issued by his legal representatives, it was fiercely argued that the front office was deliberately trying to mentally provoke him into a breach of contract simply to save their own money. The situation rapidly devolved into a bizarre, highly toxic daily soap opera. He would occasionally buy premium tickets to sit in the front row of his own team's games, acting as a silent, smiling ghost deliberately haunting the executives who openly despised him. How could the ultimate hometown hero become a complete, untouchable outcast in the very city that once worshipped the ground he walked on? The psychological tension stretched to the absolute breaking point, and the toxic stalemate finally exploded on February 24, 2009, when a severe severance document was officially signed, aggressively slamming the doors of New York shut on him forever. Buying your way out of a waking nightmare sounds like the ultimate form of freedom, but what happens when you realize the rest of the professional world no longer wants anything to do with you? Stephon Marbury finally escaped his highly toxic New York prison, but his supposed salvation was merely a cruel, fleeting illusion. Transaction records from the professional league explicitly show that on February 27, 2009, Stephon officially signed a brand new contract with the Boston Celtics. The defending champions were desperately looking for a veteran spark to help them secure another title, and taking a chance on a disgraced superstar seemed like a calculated, low-risk gamble. But here is the critical investigative question. Was this a genuine opportunity for redemption, or merely an act of utter desperation from a player who intimately knew his time was rapidly running out? According to the published financial summaries of the association, his new salary in Boston was a proportional veteran minimum, sitting at roughly $1.2 million. Compare that incredibly modest figure to his previous highly publicized $20 million paychecks. This astonishing financial plunge is a glaring piece of documentary evidence. It definitively proved exactly how far his market value had plummeted in the eyes of ruthless professional executives. He was no longer the brilliant franchise savior. He was a cheap, highly expendable insurance policy. The media heavily promoted this as a beautiful comeback story, but the reality on the hardwood was painfully different. In the reports of sports journalists closely following the team, it was openly noted that he looked completely lost in the playoff rotation, entirely stripped of his former explosive confidence. He was a pale, hesitant shadow of the arrogant prince from Coney Island, quietly fading into the background while the team's established stars carried the heavy load. His playoff performance was remarkably dismal, leaving both the loyal fans and the demanding coaching staff deeply underwhelmed. When the season abruptly ended, he packed his bags, confidently expecting to sign a new, lucrative deal in the upcoming free agency period. However, the summer arrived, and his telephone completely stopped ringing. Not a single professional team wanted to risk their locker room chemistry on him, and this sudden, deafening silence from the league executives directly pushed him to the absolute edge, triggering a highly disturbing, continuous 24-hour public broadcast that would leave the entire internet absolutely horrified. When the glaring spotlight of immense professional fame suddenly clicks off forever, the resulting silence can completely shatter a man's fragile sanity. The summer of 2009 was logically supposed to be a period of intense negotiation and athletic training, but for Stephon Marbury, it rapidly morphed into a terrifying psychological descent watched by millions of strangers in real time. He was completely isolated, trapped alone inside his lavish mansion with nothing but a webcam and his own spiraling, paranoid thoughts. According to the archived digital logs of the streaming platform Justin.tv, in July 2009, the former superstar launched a continuous live video broadcast that lasted for an agonizing 24 uninterrupted hours. Why would a fiercely private, highly defensive athlete suddenly expose his most vulnerable, unhinged moments to a notoriously cruel online audience? Was it a desperate, subconscious cry for help, or the total, irreversible collapse of his mental defenses? Media outlets meticulously monitoring the bizarre broadcast carefully documented highly disturbing behavior. In the published transcripts of the stream, it was explicitly recorded that Stephon was uncontrollably weeping to slow rhythm and blues music, delivering incoherent, rambling monologues to his computer screen, and in the most shocking moment of all, physically eating petroleum jelly right out of the plastic jar. In the video, he bizarrely claimed to his viewers that the Vaseline was an old, trusted remedy used to cure a sore throat. This specific, highly erratic action became the definitive, tragic visual image of his massive public downfall. The American sports press immediately pounced on this shocking footage, aggressively labeling him a broken, urban madman who had finally lost his grip on reality. The reports painted a bleak, sensationalized picture of a man entirely consumed by his own monumental ego and subsequent rejection. He was no longer a respected basketball player in the eyes of the public. He was a tragic internet spectacle, a grim cautionary tale of what happens when the money remains, but the glory vanishes. The executives in the professional league offices watched the viral clips with grim satisfaction, officially writing his professional obituary. However, while the American media was confidently burying his legacy, a completely unexpected phone call in January 2010 would offer him a one-way ticket to a bizarre new world. How does a man who was once the undisputed, arrogant king of New York basketball suddenly become completely invisible to a billion-dollar sports industry? The sheer speed of his total erasure from the public consciousness was absolutely staggering, orchestrated with a cold corporate precision that only a massive sports monopoly could execute. Statistical archives from the Professional Association confirm a brutal reality. The 2009 to 2010 regular season officially tipped off without Stephon Marbury on any active roster. This was the very first time in 13 consecutive years that the spectacular point guard from Coney Island was not lacing up his sneakers for an opening night game. The establishment had quietly yet incredibly effectively blacklisted him from the sport he loved. According to the whispers among influential sports agents and franchise managers, he was universally labeled a purely toxic asset. But was his talent truly gone? Or was the league simply punishing him for refusing to quietly submit to their absolute authority? The sheer weight of this unprecedented forced retirement plunged him into a terrifying emotional abyss. In a deeply personal, highly revealing television documentary released several years later in 2014, the player himself bravely confessed to enduring severe, agonizing bouts of depression during this incredibly dark period. The most alarming revelation from those documentary interviews was his admission that he experienced profound, recurring thoughts of permanently bringing his own story to a tragic, premature close. This specific, chilling confession completely changes the narrative of his entire exile. He was not just a stubborn, wealthy athlete pouting over lost millions. He was a broken human being, fundamentally stripped of his lifelong identity, staring into a terrifying void of nothingness. The American sports machine had chewed him up, extracted his most spectacular, profitable years, and mercilessly spat him out when his psychological baggage became entirely too heavy to carry. He was totally trapped in a seemingly endless nightmare of isolation and public mockery, completely out of options. But just as the darkness threatened to consume him entirely, a desperate provincial team from an industrial Chinese city mailed him a highly unusual contract, offering a final, perilous escape route that would completely resurrect his shattered soul. Stephon Marbury was completely radioactive in his home country, but utter desperation often forces a man to look for salvation in the most unlikely places on earth. According to the dispatches from international news agencies, in January 2010, a bizarre and highly unexpected contract was officially signed. The former New York king was packing his bags for a provincial, heavily industrial Chinese city to play for the Shaanxi Brave Dragons. The massive cultural shock was immediate and intensely severe. He traded the glittering luxury of Manhattan penthouses and private jets for freezing arenas and long bus rides through heavily polluted manufacturing hubs. But why would a man who once demanded a maximum contract of over $100 million suddenly agree to play in a league completely ignored by the Western media? Was it purely a desperate financial grab, or a man fundamentally running away from his own shattered reflection? In the official match reports published by the Chinese Basketball Association, it was explicitly recorded that the former superstar scored exactly 15 points in his debut game overseas. 15 points. For a man who used to drop 40 points on the best defenders in the world, this specific number seems astonishingly modest. However, it signaled something far more profound than just a box score. The American media openly mocked this overseas adventure as a sad, pathetic epilogue to a wasted career, confidently predicting he would quit and fly home within a month. He was expected to be a typical arrogant import, taking the money and ignoring the local culture entirely. But Stephon Marbury surprised everyone, including himself, when he realized that the people in the stands were not judging him for his past scandals. They were simply cheering for the human being standing on the court. He initially assumed he was just taking a brief exile to collect a final paycheck, but an incredibly emotional interaction with the local supporters in December 2010 would completely flip his perspective and trigger an astonishing personal metamorphosis. The massive ego that had once actively destroyed professional locker rooms in America was systematically dismantled and completely rebuilt in the humid south of China. Following his initial stint, official registries of the Chinese League confirm his transition to the Foshendralians for the 2010 to 2011 season. In a deeply fascinating turn of events, the player who once famously alienated coaches and teammates suddenly began to embrace extreme humility. The documentary evidence of this radical transformation did not come from a sports highlight reel, but from the everyday citizens commuting to work. In the published photographs of local municipal newspapers, Stephon Marbury was clearly captured riding the crowded public subway system, blending in perfectly with the regular working class. Why would a wealthy, internationally famous athlete choose to squeeze into a train car instead of demanding a luxury private chauffeur? According to the features written by journalists shadowing him, this was a highly deliberate, calculated choice to completely strip away his toxic American superstar persona. He began actively studying the language, immersing himself in ancient philosophical teachings, and reading the daily newspaper to fundamentally understand his new neighbors. This was not a cynical public relations stunt. It was a desperate, highly successful attempt to completely rebuild his shattered psyche from the ground up. He realized that the relentless pursuit of individual statistics had brought him nothing but profound misery and isolation. Instead of demanding the ball, he began relentlessly mentoring the young, inexperienced local players, sharing his vast basketball knowledge without a single ounce of his former signature arrogance. The man who was once universally labeled a selfish cancer in the locker room was slowly mutating into a deeply respected teacher. But this quiet period of profound personal reflection was merely the calm before a monumental storm, because in August 2011, a signed contract with the biggest club in the capital city would set the stage for an absolute, unimaginable miracle. The true test of a resurrected leader is not how well he plays in the shadows, but how he handles the blistering heat of the biggest stage available. The ultimate opportunity for monumental redemption arrived right in the heart of the capital. According to the official press releases issued by the club's management, an incredibly lucrative, high-stakes contract with the Beijing Ducks was formally signed in August 2011. Stephon Marbury was no longer just a curious foreign import. He was explicitly brought in to be the supreme commander of a squad desperately trying to overthrow a tyrannical basketball dynasty. But the historical context surrounding this specific transaction reveals a massive, almost impossible challenge. In the detailed historical data archives of the Chinese Association, a glaring statistical fact stood out clearly. The Beijing franchise had never won a single championship in their entire existence. They were perpetual underdogs, constantly humiliated by the dominant powerhouse from Guangdong. How could a 34-year-old castaway, completely discarded by his own country, possibly lead a historically mediocre team to the promised land? The investigative reports covering the team's training camp noted a fundamental shift in the franchise's internal power dynamics. Stephon was no longer just running plays. He had essentially become an unofficial playing coach, aggressively demanding absolute excellence from his teammates while simultaneously protecting them from the vicious local press. He injected them with a fierce, uncompromising belief that the impossible was actually achievable. He was actively rewriting the narrative of his entire life, proving to the invisible American executives watching from afar that he was absolutely capable of building a winning culture from scratch. The tension built steadily throughout the grueling winter campaign, culminating in an epic, brutal collision course with the defending champions. By the time the final series tipped off in the spring of 2012, an astonishing statistical reality emerged. He was about to play the most important basketball of his life, while being intensely watched by a television audience far larger than any group of fans he ever faced in New York. The ultimate redemption arc is rarely written without a massive amount of physical pain and unimaginable psychological pressure. In the spring of 2012, Stephon Marbury found himself standing on the precipice of absolute basketball immortality, but his physical body was rapidly betraying him. According to the official protocols of the Chinese Basketball Association Finals from March 2012, his squad spectacularly dismantled the defending dynasty with a decisive 4-1 series victory. But how did a heavily battered, aging point guard manage to completely dominate players 10 years his junior? In the sports chronicles covering that exact championship run, it was explicitly recorded that Stephon dropped a staggering 41 points in the decisive, title-clinching matchup. 41 points on a highly hostile court. However, the true hidden cost of this legendary performance was fiercely guarded by the team's medical staff. In the reports of local journalists permitted inside the locker room corridors, it was noted that Stephon was repeatedly receiving agonizing pain-killing injections just to remain standing on his own 2 feet. He was literally trading his long-term physical health for a single, defining moment of absolute glory. When the final buzzer finally echoed through the massive arena, the hardened veteran immediately collapsed to the wooden floor, uncontrollably sobbing into his hands. But these were not the dark, terrifying tears of a fractured mind eating petroleum jelly in front of a webcam 3 years prior. These were the pure, overwhelming tears of a man who had successfully crawled out of his own personal hell. He had finally found his ultimate vindication on the exact opposite side of the planet. This spectacular silver trophy marked the violent birth of a completely unprecedented era of sporting dominance, for which the local government would soon reward the American outcast in a manner absolutely no foreigner had ever experienced in the history of the nation. Winning a single championship can often be dismissed by harsh critics as a lucky fluke, but establishing a ruthless multi-year dynasty completely silences even the loudest skeptics. Stephon Marbury did not just win one trophy and quietly ride off into the sunset. He systematically built an absolute empire on the hardwood. According to the official statistical data of the professional league, the kid from Coney Island led his beloved Beijing franchise to 2 additional monumental championship titles in the years 2014 and 2015. He was completely dominating the competition, but an astonishing biographical fact makes this achievement truly mind-boggling. In the verified biographical records of the association, it was explicitly highlighted that Stephon was exactly 38 years old when he captured his 3rd championship ring. 38 years old. How is it humanly possible for a severely aging guard, previously discarded by the American system as permanently damaged goods, to run circles around an entire continent of elite athletes? In the public materials released by the league office, he was officially crowned the most valuable player of the finals in 2015, cementing his absolute authority over the sport. In the investigative features covering this unprecedented cultural phenomenon, reporters noted that his massive influence had heavily expanded far beyond the painted lines of the basketball court. He was actively dictating the entire basketball culture of a massive nation, fundamentally inspiring millions of young kids to adopt his fierce, unapologetic style of play. He was essentially elevated to the status of a living demigod, worshipped by massive crowds everywhere he traveled. The spectacular sporting trophies and the prestigious player awards were merely the visible tip of a massive cultural iceberg. But in December 2015, the municipal authorities of the capital city issued an incredibly rare, shocking document that completely stunned the elite American press. The ultimate measure of a man's legacy is not just the heavy medals hanging around his neck, but the permanent monuments society actively builds in his absolute honor. While his former American employers were desperately trying to scrub his name from their corporate histories, his adopted home was busily casting his likeness in solid bronze. According to international news reports from networks in December 2015, a massive, dedicated museum explicitly named the House of Marbury was officially opened to the general public right in the heart of Beijing. This astonishing exhibition hall covered roughly 300 square meters of premium real estate, meticulously detailing every single triumph of his miraculous overseas rebirth. But why would a notoriously strict foreign government allow a highly controversial, deeply flawed American athlete to construct a massive public shrine to his own ego? In the architectural plans and municipal permits, it was noted that the city fully supported the project, viewing him not as a volatile basketball player, but as a supreme symbol of absolute perseverance and unwavering civic loyalty. However, the true, breathtaking climax of this incredible cultural integration arrived just a few months later. According to the official statements from the National Immigration Service of the Republic, in April 2016, Stephon Marbury was formally granted a highly coveted permanent resident card. This extremely rare immigration document is notoriously difficult to obtain, making him the very first foreign basketball star in history to receive such an extraordinary governmental privilege. From a disgraced, heavily mocked outcast completely banished from his own hometown, they literally erected a massive physical monument to his legacy halfway across the globe, forcing us to ask the final, most profound question of our entire investigation. When the final buzzer ultimately sounds on a turbulent, highly controversial career, history forces us to desperately search for the ultimate truth behind the dazzling headlines. Was Stephon Marbury a tragically misunderstood, incredibly sensitive genius, or simply a brilliant madman who managed to successfully outrun his own dark shadows? According to the official retirement press releases distributed to the global media on February 11, 2018, the legendary point guard finally permanently unlaced his sneakers for the very last time. The formal document marked the absolute conclusion of a spectacular 22-year professional athletic odyssey. But here is the ultimate investigative question. Did he genuinely step away from the hardwood because his physical body finally failed? Or had he simply achieved absolute peace in a universe he built entirely from scratch? The American sporting establishment, which had so ruthlessly exiled him a full decade prior, was suddenly forced to deeply reevaluate his massive, undeniable international impact. In the official production notes and release data of the highly acclaimed documentary film from 2019, the media narrative completely shifted. This specific cinematic record explicitly framed his entire global journey, not as a humiliating public failure, but as a phenomenal, totally unprecedented triumph of the human spirit. The film critically examined how the massive, billion-dollar corporate machine systematically breaks down young athletes grappling with severe mental pressures. Yet Stephon somehow found a secret, highly miraculous escape hatch. He completely bypassed the toxic, incredibly unforgiving American media landscape by physically relocating his entire existence to an unfamiliar foreign land. The monumental wealth, the bitter locker room wars, and the agonizing corporate lawsuits in New York were all simply brutal, necessary stepping stones. And perhaps that profoundly disturbing 24-hour live internet broadcast where he famously consumed petroleum jelly was never actually the tragic absolute downfall of Stephon Marbury. In the grand sweeping context of his unbelievable resurrection, that viral, tear-soaked footage was merely the highly public, necessary burial of his toxic former ego, deliberately broadcast to the entire world so that a completely new, profoundly enlightened champion could finally be born on the exact opposite side of the planet.